All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Christopher Locke. I'm the IBPA Director of Membership and Member Services. And we're doing this webinar series called the Get to Know Your IBPA Member Benefits because we want to make sure members understand they have tons of options for member benefits, and we want them to understand how each one works. So today I'm excited because we're going to talk about VoiceOver Vermont. And I'm happy to introduce our speaker today, VoiceOver Vermont owner and executive producer, Mary Catherine Jones. Hello.
Hello.
Awesome. I'm going to go away and Mary Catherine's going to take over. And if you have questions, again, put them in the Q&A and I'll pop back on, and Mary Catherine's happy to answer them during the webinar. Thanks, everyone.
All right, everyone. So thank you all for tuning in, whether you're here live or whether you're going to be watching this on record. I'm Mary Catherine Jones. My business is VoiceOver Vermont, and I help authors and publishers create audiobook editions of their books. Little bit about me, like all of you, I'm sure, avid reader, all of that. One of my first jobs out of college was I ended up running sales and marketing for a small publishing company here in Vermont. So I did that for about 6 years. I helped start the Children's Literacy Foundation here in Vermont and New Hampshire, and also very avid supporter and library enthusiast. And now, of course, I have my production studio. So that's sort of my bona fides. Let's see if I can get this thing to advance the way it's supposed to. There we go. So today, what we're going to cover is a current market snapshot, the ins and outs of audiobook production, which is really my bailiwick, talk a little bit about audiobook marketing, and also some unique assets some unique audiobook ways to use your audiobook assets. And then if we have time, we will have some Q&A at the end. But as Christopher was saying, please, if you have questions during the presentation, pop them in the Q&A thing, and he will he will ask them to me, and I will answer as I am able. All right. You all have heard about the growing audiobook market, and it is still growing. This is the 11th year where it has had double-digit growth. You can see that, well, you can see that on the graph, how much it's grown. I believe that last year, the total growth was, or the total net sales was $1.79 billion, billion with a B. So we're very fortunate to be in a time when people have many different ways to read their books, including reading with their ears. And of course, that's what audiobook production is all about. You can see that, well, basically that I wouldn't say that there's any limit to how it's going to grow. And I'm very pleased to see that it continues to grow. So what we can see here is that 53% of consumers 18 and over have ever listened to an audiobook, which is up from last year of just 45%. So that market is growing and growing. Now, what's also interesting is that of those people who have listened to an audiobook, most of them are listening to 6 or more during the course of a year. So this is a market that has people who are engaged at all different levels. The majority of people who listen to audiobooks skews towards the younger end of the spectrum, between 18 and 44. So not necessarily juniors, but in that square in the middle age. And so that's the majority of the market, although that's starting to grow also into older demographics. And as you can see also, audiobook listeners today closely match the US population, with 29% of audiobook listeners identifying as either African American or Hispanic, compared to 27% of the population. One of the conversations that I have with authors that I talk to and work with is they're still trying to understand the audiobook market as a thing. Many writers have written their book and put it out into the world without even considering creating an audiobook. And I get you. I'm actually somebody who, by and large, prefers to consume my books with my eyes. That's how I grew up. That's how I connect most viscerally to the material. But I promise you, there are more and more people who only are reading with their ears. And arguably, these are people who have basically not been counted as readers in the marketplace. And it's only because of the advent of audiobooks that they are now becoming more and more avid readers. So why? Why is the market growing? Well, in addition to what I was just saying, people with the ability to plug in, while you're driving, while you are doing your chores, you've got headphones. It's, the portability of audiobooks. It's you can do this anywhere. I sometimes go outside, and when I'm gardening or raking, I'll be listening to an audiobook. Anytime people are engaged in multitasking or something where they know that they can consume other media, they'll plug in. So that's one of the reasons that audiobooks is growing. I know that for me, when I'm doing housework, I love having the distraction of a story to listen to. And as that has become so convenient for everybody, more and more people are doing that. There's also, we're seeing that because people are realizing how easy it is, the demand for content grows and grows and grows, as we showed by that earlier graph. And also the ability to purchase and listen or rent audiobooks has become so easy. No longer is Audible the only game in town. There's also Overdrive, which supplies the library market. There's Spotify, who just recently got into the audiobook game, where they're now allowing, I think, their premium subscribers up to 5 hours of content at no charge and that kind of thing. So that's going to impact the market in a way we don't know exactly yet, because it just happened in the last couple of weeks. So there are a lot of different ways that these audiobooks are available, making it easier for people to obtain the audiobooks. So now let's get into my area of expertise and what I love talking about. And hopefully I won't nerd out too much on this. We're going to talk about how to create an audiobook. We'll go over the choice of narrator, sort of the mechanics of recording and editing and mastering. We'll touch a little bit on distribution, which we were just talking about, and we'll also touch on marketing. All right. The very first question that I need to answer and help an author decide is who's going to narrate their audiobook. Their choices are, of course, the author themselves, hiring a professional talent, and increasingly, there's the question about artificial intelligence and narrating with AI. We will get to that. So, does it make sense for an author to narrate their book? The most logical time for an author to narrate is if they've written a memoir. I argue pretty much hands down that unless there is a real reason for the author not to narrate, and it could be that they just really don't want to, but if they have written a memoir, literally their story in their words, it should be their voice that is carrying the story. So that would be one application. Legacy projects. Perhaps I'm actually working with a narrator right now who is narrating her mother's memoir. So that would be an example of a legacy project. Poetry, again, bringing the poet's voice literally into the words that they have written. If the author has written a book that is about personal development, or about a particular way of running a business, something where it's really so much not a theory that they're, or some research that they are sharing, but really their view of why something is the way it is or how something can be improved, then it makes sense for their voice to be the driver for that project. I work with tons of coaches who have written books, anywhere from how to be a better parent to how to be a better gardener to, coaching for life coaches. When that coach has written a book to reach a broader audience, using their words to attach to that book makes perfect sense. And of course, what they're doing there is they're building not just their author platform, but also their speaking platform. They are establishing themselves in yet another way as experts in their field, and they now have the voice to show as part of what they can offer. For professional narration, I usually recommend that for works of fiction, something where the performance is going to be the key driver of the piece. So then we would want to look at a professional narrator. So for fiction, for science fiction, for narrative nonfiction, for children's books, there's a real talent and as a way to engage with an audience for children's books. And then anything that has a more dramatic component, I would say has that really requires a professional narrator. I see that there's a question.
Sure, you're so on top of it. You're like, I'm gonna answer questions now. Okay, so people are saying with an author narrated project, do you test to see if they are appropriate, such as dry throat, all that, speaking, voice breaking? How does that process work?
That is a great question. And let me just say also, please do ask me questions, because what I'm trying to do in this presentation is I'm having a very one-sided conversation that I usually cover in the course of an exploratory conversation with an author. And so it helps me in my flow if I'm sort of responding to an actual person. So thank you for the question. So the question was, do I test the voice? And what I will do is I'm going to listen to see if there's anything in the way that the prospective narrator, the author, speaks that is distracting. Because if there's a vocal tic, like you said, if there's dry throat, if there's a persistent cough, and we're not talking about somebody who has a cold, but maybe that's always then that would, for me, be something to discuss with the author as a possible reason not to narrate. That being said, if I know that I have worked with older authors whose voices are not quite as strong, and so they've worried like, well, I sound kind of old. And what I usually say is, well, you are older. You have written your memoir, and so you need to sound like yourself. Now, if you wrote a memoir when you were 30, but you're thinking about narrating it when you're 70, that's an entirely different conversation. And that would be a reason not to have the author be the narrator. So basically, does the voice match the age of the memoir, where it was written and all of that? And is there anything about that voice that is going to detract from the story that they are telling? If there are severe reading impediments, that kind of thing, then yeah, we'd have a different discussion, and perhaps I would suggest having a professional narrator. So I hope that answers the question, and if not, follow up in the Q&A.
Let me tell you, that is quite the patience, writing a memoir at 30 and being like, I'm gonna wait till I'm 70. That is the sweet spot of this particular book. So people are also wondering about if they want one, let's say it's fiction, if they have one narrator or if they should have a cast.
So the answer is it depends. And that's going to depend on the project, and that's going to depend, quite honestly, on your budget. I work mostly with single narrators. Sometimes I will incorporate two if it's, like a romance and it's a he said, she said kind of a thing. Full cast recordings of audiobooks, that is happening more often. It is a much more expensive endeavor because you are talking about casting, obviously, multiple narrators that you then have to weave in the editing process, that, that dialogue or that interplay within that, and often involves adding a soundscape. So you're talking about sound effects and all that kind of thing. So think about it as a kind of a low budget movie, is what that would end up being as far as production. So that's my thoughts are, some of those are fabulous and they're great to listen to. They are a much more time and labor intensive undertaking.
Yeah. So you may get to this next question later, but someone's asking about timing. So if they have a print book, ebook version, is it important to have the audiobook come out at the same time, or is it fine to wait to release the audiobook to later? What are your thoughts on that?
I am so glad whoever this is asked that, because as I was going over my presentation, I was like, oh, I should have had a slide about timing. And I don't. So I will answer your question. And again, the answer is it depends. So what I'm seeing is more and more people are moving towards having a simultaneous release on all three platforms. And it's basically because those are folks who recognize that people who want to buy or want to have the book are going to want it in their preferred format, whether that's physical, digital, or audio. So there is a benefit to having all of that available, because then you're taking advantage of the biggest push, which is going to be the initial launch, and then people will buy as they feel they want to, depending on the format. That being said, I also work with plenty of people and publishers who deliberately delay the release of the audiobook because it gives the publisher or author a reason to kind of re-promote the book. Sometimes they'll release it and a year after, if they've released their book in hardcover. Sometimes they'll release the audiobook and the paperback at the same time. So I think it really depends on what the market is, and also some people are delaying because they're just waiting to recoup some of the costs of their print book, and they want to have that before they roll it over into an audiobook. And sort of as a follow-up answer to a question that might be asked, which is, how do I know, if the audiobook is going to sell? The answer is you don't. But what you can know is that if your print and ebook version are selling, then almost certainly there will be a part of that market that would prefer to have it in audio. Part of that's going to depend too on how you're promoting across all of those different platforms. And so I think, generally speaking, if let's say that you have a book that you released a few years ago and now you're like, I don't know, should I do an audiobook version? The first thing I would ask is, has anybody asked you for the audiobook version? Mm-hmm. And if people have asked you for the audiobook version, then you know that people want it in the audiobook version. And if they haven't, then maybe that's a reason to rethink it, or think, if I'm going to do an audiobook version, how am I going to make sure that I sell it?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I've definitely had people say that to me about my books. And I'm like, I mean, I don't have the budget right now, but yes, one day I would love to do an audiobook version. But it's a nice feeling because you have people out there that are like clearly showing interest. So someone asked, has anyone released the audiobook version first instead of the print or the ebook version?
The answer is yes. Nobody that I have worked with has done that, but it has certainly happened out in the wild, in the publishing wild. And I think that, again, that's going to, you would want to do that if you have a specific reason to. Maybe, I mean, I'm thinking off the top of my head here, but if you have a story that is very much audio forward, then I can see that being available first in audio. I can also see somebody who is a really well-known orator, somebody who is a public personality or something, who is particularly known for their voice. I could see an advantage of releasing the audiobook first, because that's going to promote what they're most well known for, which is their own speaking voice. So the answer is yes, people definitely do that. There have also been, I'm sure, some of you have heard about this in the news. There have been some that have been released strictly only to audio. And they're doing that for, again, whatever particular reasons. But I think most people are going to want to release either simultaneously or probably lead with the print version.
Yeah, and since we're on this professional narrator, do you give people, like, let's say they're like, I want a professional narrator, do you give them like options? Like, here's 5 people that I would suggest. How does that work in terms of picking the voice?
Oh, absolutely. So when I'm working with somebody to choose a professional narrator, we're going to go over the book itself. We're going to figure out things like, okay, so who is the central voice of this book? Are we looking at a male or female? That's usually the first kind of, dividing tree that we're going to look at. And then at what age, and what kind of scope of performance are we going to be asking of this narrator? Some is just going to be pretty much a single, point of view, which is one kind of narrator. Others might require a lot more versatility. So once I establish what that is that we need for this particular project, the way I work is I send that out to I'm part of many, many professional voiceover networks. And so I'll send out auditions and specifically have them read a couple of pages of the author's text. And then together we will go through them. I usually I get upwards of, 20 to 30 auditions for any particular project. I'll pick my top 3 to 5. And usually from those, we're going to find the right narrator. And if not, if there's not a connection with those voices, then I would just, cast the net out to the seas again, and see if we can't find someone. And that's how I usually do those projects.
Awesome. We'll go to the other questions in a bit. So I will disappear. Thank you.
All right, so let's talk about narrating with AI. This is becoming more and more of a thing in the news. In my experience, it is not so much of a thing yet with authors and publishers. I think that, as with anything, this is something that's going to grow and grow. When you're working with an AI narrator, that's usually happening because price is the main concern and performance is the last concern. I have had some experience working with AI and trying to train it on different voices. And what I have found is that to get a narration that is infused with meaning and connection requires a considerable amount of manipulation on the back end. So while you might be able to get a particular voice, and there's now options out there, I am just starting to get more familiar with it, but where an author could conceivably record their voice and then have it manipulated by AI to basically narrate their book, it's going to sound like AI is narrating a book in your voice. So I think it's a little bit strange. However, there are applications for it, particularly when you have a publisher or an author with an extensive backlist, and it's just like, we just have to get it out there. We just got to do it. So then it would make sense with AI. So here's a story about an application that I think AI is perfectly suited for. And it doesn't involve a book, but I think you all get the point. So in addition to being a producer and director, I'm also a voice talent. And particularly about 10, 15 years ago, before I got into production, I was exclusively a voice talent. And at that time, it was when the Affordable Care Act was being proposed. And so there was a call, because the Obama administration was trying to push that through as quickly as possible and all that. So we had a lot of legislators who needed to get information about it. And so there was a call put out to voice talent to read the bill. And so what ended up happening was there was a whole cadre of voice talent that took chunks of this really dense legislation and narrated it. I contributed, I think it was 5 hours of finished audio for what ended up being, I think it was over 1,000 hours of audio. But this was because legislators, they would listen as they were going to and from, their meetings in Congress, and it was sort of the only way they could get that information. To my mind, that would be a perfect application for AI narration, where it's really all about just get me the information, just get me the information. And it's not about the nuance of performance, in subsection C, paragraph 2, whereas, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my big answer on AI, is that it's not quite ready for prime time, but it is an option that makes sense in certain applications. So are there any questions about AI before I go on to the next slide?
Well, I know there's some or a lot of distributors for audiobooks won't even accept a book that was narrated by AI. So on the back end, when you go to sell it, that could prove to be a real problem, right?
100%. that is a very good point.
Okay, so just to put that out there for people, that's another reason why AI might prove to be difficult.
Yes. All right. So now we're going to talk about the mechanics of recording your audiobook. When doing this, you've got your choices between working at a professional studio, and more, it's possible to record at your own home. So we're going to talk about both of that. And let me qualify by saying that when we're working with a professional narrator, basically by definition, they're working in a professional studio. So I'm not going to go into detail about that, but I'll talk specifically about authors as narrators working either in a professional studio or how to work out of a home studio. All right. So whether you're doing something at home or working in a professional studio, this is sort of the baseline of what you have to create a good quality recording. You need a quiet, sound-treated area. You need a good quality microphone. You need headphones. You need a computer. And you need a digital audio workstation. I have heard of some folks who have recorded an audiobook in GarageBand. I would not recommend that because there's not a whole lot of versatility in there. Some low-cost options, low to no cost, would be Adobe's Audacity. That's a really great sort of one-track option for those who just need to record a voice track. Or a remote recording platform so that somebody else can basically direct you remotely, whether you're in a studio, professional studio, or in a corner of. So working at a professional studio, you're definitely going to get your highest quality recording. That does not mean that you can't get very high quality end results from working out of a home studio. And again, that's like you can have a good, like a closet with a lot of clothes in it, can end up having a great sound floor, which means you're going to get a great recording, intimate experience. But going into a recording studio means that you're not recording with your sweaters. So that's the highest quality. It's also the most efficient just because of the software that professional studios have. They can record, stop and start, and kind of start that preliminary editing on the fly during the recording process. You also have the benefit of working with an on-site producer and director, and usually the finished product can be completed more quickly just because there's going to be less editing on the back end. Any questions about that?
Not specifically about that, but where someone's kind of going back to the AI thing, that talking about it taking jobs of people that work in the industry. So you want to chat about that idea of, like, for example, audiobook narrators, losing their jobs, that kind of thing.
Oh, I think that that's like truly a whole other webinar. And yeah, it's a thing. I mean, when I say it's a whole other webinar, I literally just went to a whole other webinar that was put on by the Audio Publishers Association about that very topic. So yes, it's a growing concern among people who are in the industry for a lot of reasons. Clearly those of us who work with human talent feel that that is the gold standard. And so anything that's going to take away from that experience, the user experience, the listener experience, we don't feel like that's the right direction to be going in. So, I mean, that's my personal feeling. I think that there are applications for it, like I was saying, but I think that we'll just have to see. So I agree, but that's, yeah, it's a whole other webinar.
Yeah, well, we all know that robots are evil because they don't have a soul. So
There you go.
let's just put that there. Okay, you can keep going. We'll ask the other questions later.
Awesome, that's great. Okay, so another option from working in a professional studio is working in a home studio. Obviously, that's going to be a lot more convenient. It's going to give you the flexibility, so you don't have to go to a studio. You don't have to work around their schedule. You can do this now with remote recording and direction. I work with authors in their homes, or actually another option. I should backtrack because this is becoming more and more of a thing. Probably some of you have heard of podcast studios that are kind of popping up around the country. Often libraries will have a room where you can go in and record a podcast. They're not professional quality sound booths in my experience, but they are a good alternative to, your kitchen table. So you can sort of think about that as sort of a sub option, sort of between the home studio and the professional studio. But back to the home studio, you have those conveniences literally of home. The cons are that because they're not professionally treated, oftentimes the room sound will vary during the different times of the day, which I know sounds like it's crazy and I'm making it up, but I'm really not. A room will have an actual tone that can differ from 8 a.m. in the morning to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And the reason that that's even important is because if you're recording from 8 to 9 a.m. and then you take a break and then you pick up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, what happens is that the ear hears a change. The ear doesn't really, unless you're trained to hear it, they're like, wait, something's different. And as your brain is thinking, wait, something's different, you have disengaged from the story. So the goal of any kind of professional recording, whether you're doing it at home with a lot of post-production or in a professional studio, is to keep the listener engaged, is to have a recording that doesn't distract from the story or the information that is being imparted. So that's a long way of saying that working out of a home studio, a non-professional studio, it's more labor intensive. So what I have found and is that when I'm working in those situations, I'm just spending a lot more time in the post-production process. So that takes more time. A very quick illustration of that is that when recording in a professional studio, like whether you're here in my studio in Vermont or whether there's a remote, I'm directing you remotely at a professional studio in your backyard, we're going to be using the digital audio workstation that we talked about. The standard is usually Pro Tools. So that's what I work with. That's what most studios work with. And in Pro Tools, there's a function called punch and roll, which is very nice. And so as we're working and the narrator is narrating and oh, there's a mistake. Okay, we need to just stop. So we take it back and have you pick it up from the beginning of the last sentence. And so in this software, we can put our cursor right at that spot. You'll hear the last few words that you said, and then you will seamlessly pick it up and keep on narrating. There is still editing to be done in that work when everything is said and done. But when you don't have that, then you're recording you're recording you're recording open roll. And open roll means that every single thing that you're saying from the start of the session to the end of the session is going to need to be gone through and edited. So if you say, oh, hey, hang on a second, I'm going to take a sip of water, or hang on, I need to cough, which is great. And that happens. And, please do cough and take your sip of water. But now in the editing process, that's just more stuff we have to edit out. So that's the con of recording at home. Okay. So how much time does it take to record? Here are some of the factors that go into answering that question. As a producer or as a narrator, you're going to obviously be reading the material that you're going to be recording. I actually schedule a little bit more than 2 hours of recording per finished hour. Professional narrators, you can pretty much count on the fact that, yes, it'll take them about 2 hours to get to a finished hour. That's just the way it goes. For a non-professional narrator, I'm going to schedule 2.5, maybe even 3 hours of recording time to get to that finished hour. But that's also because I want to allow time to have conversations, to have, to answer questions, and basically to make everybody feel relaxed. There's after the recording, there's the initial proofing, going through and making sure that everything is recorded that is supposed to be recorded, and identifying any misreads that were not caught in the initial recording process. Sometimes there's a little computer, glitch or pop. So we identify what we call pickups. Then we have a pickup session that's usually less than an hour. And then we put in about 2.5 hours of editing, just full stop, to get to the finished hour. Then, of course, there's the mastering so that we get to the appropriate specs for audiobook distribution. And then we have and then I've got to name the files. Oh my gosh, I just worked with an editor on a book that I'm telling you, I think that she had a chapter every half page. This poor editor had to put together, I think it was 500 chapters that were really, really small. So that obviously took a lot more time than a longer chapter naming would be. So generally speaking, for every 10,000 words, that's going to be your 1 hour of finished audio. There are different charts out there that are plus or minus. I like the nice round numbers. It works well for me. So about 10,000 words is about 1 hour of finished audio. So if you have 50,000 words, that'll end up being about 5 finished hours. If you were coming here to Vermont, I would schedule 15 hours of recording time, hope that we get it done in 12 and that there's 3 extra hours of playtime for you there. So on average, it takes about 6.2 hours to create 1 finished hour of audio. That is for professionals who know what they're doing. That does assume that we're working in a professional recording studio. If it's a home recording and we're doing a remote open roll, then it's just going to be longer in the editing process, and time will vary based on experience. And this is just a slide about the mastering specs for audio. If you are working at a recording studio that is basically focused on music, and they give you your MP3s that are mastered as if it were a record and music, it will not be able to be played as an audiobook file. ACX will reject it out of hand. So you just have to make sure that the specs for the mastering are the audiobook specs. They're pretty much industry standard, and you can see what they are right there. So now we're talking about distribution. And as we touched on earlier, there are more and more channels. I mean, I could have done a slide that had some, upwards of 100 of different places that you can distribute your audiobook. Once again, Spotify is a newcomer to the scene with their new promotion of getting those free hours or whatever bonus hours for their premium listeners. So I think that that's going to create a need for even more content. So that's out there. And let's see, before we get on to the marketing, was there any other questions?
Well, I want to ask about those retail sites, right? So do you, as the producer, give the publisher the files and then they upload them to these sites, or do you do any of that for publishers?
That is a great question. And that is one that I'm asked every single time. So I should have included it as part of my spiel here. So as an audiobook producer, first of all, I'm not a publisher. So I do not have any kind of rights over this. I'm not getting any kind of royalties. I'm not, at the end of the day, I am giving you a finished product. That finished product are the audio files that are mastered to the specs for audiobooks for distribution at any of these platforms. Now, that being said, generally it depends on who I'm working with, and it's an individual it's going to be an individual answer based on the particular client. Generally, I'm sending these finished mastered files to the end client, either the publisher or the author, and they figure out where they want to distribute it, right? Because you, as an author, as a publisher, you get to decide where it's going to be distributed. You have the option of going, you could do an Amazon exclusive, for example, and it's very similar, I think, to how it is for your print versions and your ebook versions. If you go to Amazon exclusive, and we'll get to the actual file distribution, I just feel like this is a good time to talk about this. If you go with Amazon exclusive, then you get some of their perks, their programs, their ways of promoting their book. They give you kind of a, priority treatment, basically. But doing that is going to cut you out of the market, of the independent bookstore market, by and large, and also cut you out of the library market. So you need to decide, is that important to you? That's going to be part of your job marketing your book and your audiobook. And you might have one answer for the physical book and the ebook, and one for the audiobook. That's up to you. What many of the authors that I work with have decided to do is to start with Amazon exclusive for 90 days and then open it up to all the other platforms. That way they get kind of their most bang for their buck out of the programs that Amazon offers. But then they're not limited for 7 years anymore to just their distribution. Either that, or if they're kind of a set it and forget it, they might go with Authors Republic or Findaway, which enables them to upload the files to a single platform and be distributed across all these different channels, including Amazon. And Amazon, Audible, ACX, those are all interchangeable. They're the same thing, basically. One thing that I have experienced, this is just my experience, is that if you start with Authors Republic and you say, this way I can reach all the channels, I can upload the files, I can set it and forget it. And that is basically true. I mean, you should be marketing it, but as far as uploading the files, it is taking a whole lot longer for Amazon to successfully upload those files. So whereas if you go directly to Amazon, it might take them 2 weeks from the time you submit the files to the time where they're like, yay, it's ready to sell. If it's coming from a channel like Authors Republic will show, oh yeah, we've got the green light. It's now at Amazon and they're, doing whatever they do. And Amazon is taking a lot longer to have it actually go from having been received to actually being available for sale. So there's that. I will help with that process if the author or publisher needs help, but only basically, like, I'll help upload the files to the platform, and it's just a matter of, yes, give me I have to log in as the rights holder. I have to have all those codes and then be able to drag those files in. Happy to do that. As far as, putting it on one and then opening it up to different channels and using the platforms and the programs, nope, I don't do that at all. I will help if it is a technical challenge for whomever I'm working with.
Okay. And then kind of going back to the recording studios, someone was asking, if they're not local to you, then do they normally, is there like a studio in that person's area that somebody records from, or do you just do it remotely, or how does that process work?
That's something that we're going to talk, that I would talk to the individual person about and see what their timeline is, what their preferences are, and all that kind of thing. The way that I work is, if I'm going to be remote directing with a professional studio, right, then what I'm doing is I'm going to be vetting the local studios. I'm going to be figuring out and, helping with the scheduling and all that kind of thing. So I'm absolutely able and happy to do that. And that, in my mind, is going to be the most efficient. Some people don't live within, an hour of a professional recording studio, in which case maybe we're going to look at, or they have health issues or whatever. So it makes more sense to do it from their own home. We talk through that. My pricing is basically, when we're working with a professional studio that is not here in Vermont, and I'll make my pitch to have you guys come here because it's amazing. But whatever that studio is charging, their hourly rate is what I charge, as a pass through. I don't make any profit or pad that or anything like that. So I also know to ask them for a studio discount. So ideally, my clients are not going to be paying retail for that studio time. They'll be paying a discounted rate because we'd be booking, probably in excess of 10 hours to get an audiobook recorded.
Okay. So since we're talking about these various sites, someone said they're currently distributing through Findaway Voices, but they really haven't had much luck with sales. They're wondering if you have suggestions, if any of the platforms in general, you found that your clients tend to have better luck with sales, or is it just are they all kind of the same in that sense? And it's just up to the publisher in terms of marketing and or whatever the genre is and all that stuff.
All right, so let's go to this slide, because I think this is a good segue into that, which is, you'll see it says ways to market your audiobook, and then that's crossed out. And it says use your audiobook assets. Marketing your audiobook is marketing your book. So whatever you're doing to market your book will, by and large, increase your audiobook sales. So, and I am not a book marketing expert. I've been around the block a few times. I've got some opinions, but that is definitely not my area of expertise. I'm also not an audiobook marketer per se. That's not part of the services that I provide. But again, I've got some opinions. So to answer your question specifically about Findaway versus some of these other platforms, like I was saying about Amazon, ACX, Audible, whatever you want to look at it as, they do have specific kind of promotion packages, or where you can mark everything down and 99 cents for today only, and they make that easy to do. They have coupons, they have invite people to read, they have all these kinds of co-op programs that they offer. You can of course buy your Amazon ads. All of that is pertinent to the audiobook as well as to the printed and ebook version. So what that gets back to, as far as that doesn't, in my mind, make them superior to a channel like Findaway, because of course, going through Findaway, you are also going into Audible. But it does mean that, like with anything, it really comes down to what the writer and the publisher are doing to market the book. I wish it were not so. I wish that there was some platform out there that could just would put bells and whistles on your book, but by and large, it's still going to go right back to just on the ground marketing. What are you doing to get the word out? When you have an audiobook, there are different assets that you have that you don't have as a print book. And so there are ways that you can use them. You can share the the retail audio sample. That's something that you're going to get as part of your audiobook package. It's going to be about 5 minutes of material. So that's something you can easily attach in an email. And you can even, put the corresponding pages from the book and just say, hey, have a listen, take a read, love to share this with you. And that's easy to share. You can also take the book itself and you can roll it out as a podcast, chapter by chapter, if it is conducive to that. Obviously, it's going to depend on the subject matter at hand. You can, if you know in advance, right? And this is what I really urge you all to think about, no matter who you're working with as a producer. But if you've got this book, you've put so much into it, and you know that there are, you've got your 5-minute sample, but maybe you've got like 7 different sections, short snippets that would just be like, oh, if I could distill this one piece, or, like if maybe you have a coaching practice and it's in meditation. So you want to share like these 3 different meditations. If you can ask your audio producer up front or during the recording process and say, could I get this little snippet out of the chapter, not the entire chapter, but just this, little thing, so that I can share that. Maybe you want to use that to make an audio trailer, where you work with somebody to put together visuals, or you put them together yourself in Canva, depending on your abilities there. Those are other ways to share on social media. Certainly the creation of your audiobook is an opportunity for those of you who are social media savvy to have your producer take pictures of you in the booth, maybe a picture of you recording. You can, mix and match as you think would be fun to do, but you can share that and some of the audio from that on social media. By doing an audiobook and by having these, sort of targeted, pre-thought out snippets, those are things you can send out as part of a speaker's package when you are pitching yourself to speak at different conferences, if that is something that you're using your book to do, to raise your profile. It literally gives them an idea of what kind of speaker you would be. And we are now almost at the end of my presentation, but I do want to talk a little bit about what my company offers, and you'll get to know more about that if you look at the IBPA member page and my membership offering. But what I do is I do full audiobook recording and production, and I do that both here in Vermont, and I have had many authors now come to Vermont for basically a recording retreat. Most books can be recorded in a week. Not all books. If you've got your 200,000 word book, it's going to be longer than a week. But you come here, you record for a few hours, you play for a few hours, and it's really lovely. So I offer that. I also offer distance consulting and production, as we were talking about before, whether you're creating your home studio. I help with that. I've got equipment lists. I've got, we figure out the best place to record, and we do lots of sound checks so that we have, you're in the right place vis-a-vis the mic, and then we start recording. And then, of course, helping you find a partner studio near you. And should you have a book that requires professional voice talent, then I help make that happen as well. Look, there's a QR code. I've never had a QR code before. It's very exciting. So if you scan that, it'll go right to the IBPA member page, and we'll tell you more specifically about the offer. As I said at the beginning of this presentation, IBPA members receive 15% off my core services, so which is by the finished hour. So you can look at that online. I encourage all of you. There's so much more to say. I know there's so many more questions. So please, set up. If you go to my website, there's a little thing you can hit and get a 15-minute consult. I always give more than 15 minutes. I'll answer all your questions, and just talk about what it takes to be to create an audiobook. Do I think, what are my opinions about X, Y, and Z? Happy to share them. And I love talking to people. I love what I do. I love working with people, and helping them create another version of the work that they've spent so much time creating. And there we go. Final slide. Ready for more questions.
Awesome. So I wanted to ask, if someone does do it in person in your studio during their time in Vermont, do they get unlimited supplies of maple syrup? This is very important.
Maple syrup's expensive.
Oh, it's more expensive than audiobook production, apparently. Okay. We do have a few questions. One is someone's kind of just trying to figure out general pricing. And for anyone watching this and it's not live, as in you're watching it on the website, pricing might change. But anyway, someone's wondering if, they have an audiobook that's about 50,000 words. I know there's a lot of different variables. So if you're not able to pinpoint a pricing, that's fine. But are you able to give people an idea of that?
Absolutely. So right now, my prices that are current, I believe, for the next 6 months-ish, maybe 6 to 9 months, I've got to look and see, but I charge $500 per finished hour, right? So if you came to the studio and we schedule 15 hours-ish to record it, a little more, a little less, all of that is taken into consideration, all of the post-production, all the editing, all the file splitting. And what we come down to is the finished hour. So 50,000 words is going to be about 5 hours of finished audio. It might be 4 hours and 45 minutes. It might be 5.5 hours, whatever that is. It's a number. Everybody will know what it is, and multiply by 500. And it's more expensive when we're talking about doing remote production. Generally speaking, that's going to be right around the $700 per finished hour range. And that's because we're paying for the outside studio, or we're paying for extra editing because it requires more editing within the home studio.
Thank you. So another person is asking about, so they have a publisher, right? So this is like an author. And they're talking about the rights of the publisher to get the audiobook versus the author. And they're wondering, will a publisher, if they're an author, will a publisher accept you as the audiobook producer? How does that process work?
Sure. So again, it's always going to depend, your individual relationship and agreement with your publisher and all that kind of thing, right? So I work with all the major publishers, and those relationships really depend on, it's very individualized. Sometimes they revert the rights back to the author. And so then I'm working directly with the author, and just everything I just said, that is exactly how we do it. Sometimes they say, what we want is for you to be this studio, but we want our people to do all of the post-production. In which case, what I'm doing is I'm charging by my studio hour. So I'm basically just, I set the clock, people come in, you're here for 5 hours. I'm charging for 5 hours of my studio time. My rates for studio right now is $150 per hour, just, for somebody to come in and like shoot a commercial or something like that, obviously with me engineering. But for something like an audiobook, because it's going to be a longer period of time, my rates are $100 because it's going to be a block of 10 hours or more, most likely. So it just depends on the individual publisher, whether it makes sense for them to work with me because you want to be here and be the voice, whether they have relationships with other studios. It's just sort of, luck of the draw, I guess.
Yeah. And then someone's asking about the per studio or per finished hour. There's that cost, and that includes, I guess, the one narrator. Is there like, let's say they want like the 2 narrators for the 2 main characters or something. How does that process work in terms of pricing?
Sure. So first of all, to clarify, the rates I was quoting, the 500 per finished hour, are for author narrated projects, right? Mm-hmm. If we're bringing a narrator in, it's $600 because got to pay the narrator. That's a different fee. If we have more than one narrator, it's kind of going to depend on the project. So if you have a romance, for example, and we've got your male and your female, it's probably going to be $600 per finished hour, assuming that it's split up like, his chapter, her chapter. That makes it very easy, and I don't have any extra cost for that. If you're getting into a situation where the 2 characters are entering into dialogue together and you're trying to incorporate that, then I would have to look at that more closely, because the more dialogue, the more switches between characters, the more editing, the more time.
Okay. What if I wanted all my favorite books to record me doing the audio because I just like listening to my voice reading to myself? Is that weird, or can we do that? Okay, so someone has a book that's like an interactive book, and they're wondering if you have any examples of how like something they can listen to about how like an interactive book, like a choose your own adventure format, is done, so that they can see like ideas for what's possible, basically.
I do not know how to create that. I would know how to create all of the individual files, right? But how to get them to interact so that it was, if you decide to ride your bicycle into the dark cave, click here. If you decide to, go to church with your parents, click here. I mean, I don't know.
I'm choosing the cave one.
Okay, well, so Christopher, you chose poorly. No, it's a great question, and that is an intersection with technology. I wouldn't be able to show you because I haven't recorded that. Presumably, that's something that the publisher would be setting up, kind of the back end as far as how those different files interact. And if I had created one like that, then I would have an example to show you, but I don't.
Okay. I mean, this was very informative. Thanks. I also appreciate just the kind of overview of the industry and all that. We've known you at IBPA for quite some time now, and we're grateful that you're giving this as a member benefit. I know it takes a lot of hard work to put it together, so doing any type of discount, is cutting into, what already is a lot of work. So members do genuinely appreciate it. And I hope everyone that's listening here, sees that, just how much experience you have, and I hope they'll, reach out to you. It's really, it's a whole new avenue for revenue stream that people hopefully can take advantage of. So I do hope that they look into it, because like you said, there are people who specifically only listen to audiobooks. And
I know. I don't understand, but it is true.
yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, so then you're missing out on sales if you don't have that as an option. So I appreciate you for making it more available to our members. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we push stop on the recording?
No, just basically reach out to me with any questions. I'm happy to answer everything that I can. I think you get a sense a little bit of how I interact with people. Thank you so much for those of you who did ask me questions. So I got to, like actually interact. And also I am going to be at Pub U in Colorado. And so if you are going to be at Pub U in Colorado, please, let's connect. That would be really fun. I'm really looking forward to getting more involved with this community because I think that IBPA is great.
Thank you. Awesome. Well, thanks for listening, everyone. We really appreciate it. And we definitely hope you take advantage of this member benefit. It's excellent, the work that you do. And then also, again, we're hoping that everyone has access to this market so that they can take advantage of all the new revenue that they could be making with their books. So thank you, Mary Catherine.
Thank you so much.